Are you curious to learn more about HTML, especially the basic elements and where to get started? Well, this video is just for you. I'm going to go over all the HTML elements that you would use in a day in, day out basis as a web developer and how you can use them to greater effect, and also where to get started and some extra data on my experience in using them as a web developer. Let's get started and I'll show you all the cool HTML elements. Alright, so we have our HTML on the right hand side, and then I have it open on the left hand side. We don't have any style set, and I'll go over each of the elements here in the HTML on the right. Any HTML page is going to start with an HTML tag, and each of these elements can be nested. And so they need to be within these open and close brackets. And this one is HTML, and you can see that there's a closing bracket at the very bottom with a slash in the front of it. And that's how you know that this is the closing part of the element. From there, we have our head tag and our body tag. And so head, as you can see here, we have some style set, just some inline style. If you have a style sheet for like CSS, it would go here. If you're pulling in any libraries like JavaScript, what's called like a CDN, you can put that here, or anything that you want to load at the top of your HTML web page, you would put it in the head tag. Now for the body, this is where all your content goes. So for us, we have a header. You can see that on the left hand side here, I am the header. Very creative name if I do say so myself. And then in there we have the main content of the page. Most web pages start with having some kind of a navigation bar or a header, and then in the main, this is where all your content is. So all your interactable content and your text and all the pictures and images that you want to show to the world, well, this is where you would put it in the main. As you can see, we have that closed body, and then main is closed here. We also have a footer, and so if we scroll all the way down, we see the footer here, and that is how most web pages are organized. You have your navigation or header, the main content, which can be scrollable and very long, and then the footer, which most times has like contact us or like company information or any copyright information, any additional information that you want to be static across many sites, but it's not the main focus of the page. You usually put that in the footer, and you can have that outlined there. You know, that's kind of your overall layout of an HTML web page. From there, we can talk about each of the specific elements. So in H1 through an H6 is like your header, and it's styled by the browser. So these are usually bold and they have a specific font. There's an alternative to this. Like I usually prefer not to use like H1 tags to get my styling, but instead use divs, and then you can set your own style. But if you want to rely on the browser to set some stuff for you, then you can use these H1 through H6 tags. And you can see the H6 tag is quite small, and the H1 is the biggest one of the lot. From there, the thing that you're going to use on all web pages is a div and a span tag. So divs are what are called block elements. They're going to render consecutively, and your web page, whenever it's laid out, flows from the top to the bottom and from the left to the right. Whenever you have a blocking element, you can see that both of these are on their own separate lines. First div and second div, each of these are on their own lines because they're a block element, and they're not going to render next to one another. Whereas this span, this is going to render inline, and you can override this. So if you set a style on here, then you could say something like display inline block, and then you would achieve that same result where it's inline. But normal behavior for a div is to be a block element. So you can see the span is rendered, even though there's two of them, they're all rendered on the same lines. And then if we added another one, then we could add, you know, another one of these guys, number, and this will also render on the same line. So if you need things to render on the same line and you need to smush them all together, use a span. Usually you will use divs though to lay out your web page. All right, let's move on to getting input from the user, which, you know, any kind of form on the web and internet is going to be using a label and an input. Usually these are text inputs, But if you're signing into a web page, you would use a password. And so the text, you can see I have text here, password. You can see that this is just the dots that you're used to whenever you're logging into a site, and that's built into HTML. So you specify the type of your input and you get that behavior for free, which is really nice. Same thing for your date. So like if you have a date type, then you get this nice calendar view where you can select calendar date, or you can type in and modify it yourself. So again, something built into HTML. There's a lot of libraries that will customize these and style them in certain ways. One of the most popular ones is Material UI. And so that will make it look a lot more Google themed and give it a certain look and feel. But out of the box, you get this behavior. If you have a checkbox, then you can check this here, and it's still an input type, but it has this checkbox type to signify whenever it is a checkbox. So each of these you can see have a label. A lot of times you'll see where it's associated. So like you could say, this is the text input, and this would have an ID of text input or something like that. Actually, this should match the name now that I think about it. And this helps for screen readers. So anyone, that is impaired can be able to read their screen and see how to interact with your website. So having things like this greatly helps with that. Having the for and associating it with whatever input, that way the label is tied to whatever input field it is meant for. Moving on to text areas. So if you have a large body of text, and you can kind of customize this with CSS. We could also set this label to be at the start instead of at the end, but I won't get into CSS styling for right now. Instead, for this input area, we just have some default text that's inside of it, and we still have our label, and you can see we can type into this and get a lot of information, and we get this little scroll window if it's too small. If it's not, then it will go away, but that's how you would do a large input field for, maybe like 5 or 6 lines long. You would use a text area instead of an input. You can also see that we have some nesting here. So like each of these labels and inputs is wrapped in a div, and that's to get them to be on the next line. If we didn't have this, then I believe they would all run together. Yes. Yeah, the label is not a blocking element. And so similar to span, it just renders all on the same line, which is usually not what you want whenever you're building out a form. You want it to be top to bottom and laid out consecutively. So if we roll that back, we'll get our nice div separated block element behavior. Another way that you can accomplish this is using the BR tag, and this is like a break. This gives you extra lines. If we didn't have this, then the paragraph here would be right underneath this text area. So we can add a few different lines. This can get you out of a pinch, especially if you need to do it inside of another element. Usually you want to style things with CSS instead of using the BR tags, but it's here, and if you need to use it, you're getting started trying to play around with stuff, then this is the way you can accomplish that. Moving on to the paragraph. So this is where large bodies of text, like in articles or blog posts, these are all laid out in P tags. So this is your paragraph, and you can set bold and italics within that. And they don't have to be, within a P tag necessarily, but you can get bold and italics style just like that. If you have something you want to go to in a link to another website, you can use an anchor tag, which is this A. It takes this attribute href, and that you can give it a website, you can give it an image, you can give it all kinds of different things. You can even embed an image inside of this. If you wanted to have like a clickable image on your website, then whenever you click on the link, it'll take you, for ours, it'll be in Google, but it can take you wherever you need to go. Another option is to use a button. This is typically associated with JavaScript. And so you can click it and it'll execute some kind of JavaScript, update a counter, or navigate to a web page, or do all kinds of different things for you. So that is how a button would be displayed. For any select boxes, so the keyword is select, and you have many options within that. So you can see option 1 and option 2. I didn't put a label on this, but you can also use the same method of embedding the label in here and get the same look and feel. If you want to do different lists of items, then there's two options for you. You can do a UL, which is an unordered list, and an OL, which is an ordered list. And so if it's unordered, then you can see we don't get any numbers in front of it. They're just dots. You can also style this many different ways. So if you don't like seeing the dots there, you can use CSS to remove them or customize them. Like if you wanted to make them stars, then you could do that just as easily with CSS. If you want numbers, then you would use an ordered list. The other thing is you can embed these. So let's say I wanted a bulleted list underneath. If you had your first item, and then you have a couple of other items underneath it that you want to specify, like for greater context whenever you're outlining something, then you can nest them and do ordered and unordered lists within that. So each of the elements that is within those lists is just an LI for either case. And then the UL or OL is the thing that signifies like, okay, I want to style it this way. I want numbers or I want bullets. Continuing on, we have a table. That's how this one looks. There we go. So we have 2 header columns and 2 content columns and 1 row. So if we wanted multiple rows, we could accomplish it this way using this TR, which is row. Also in the header, there's a bunch of different options. This is kind of the most succinct way to define a table. You just have table and then a TR, and you have TH for your headers, and then TR again and your different content columns. So you can programmatically build these out with JavaScript, but if you want to define it in the shorthand, then you can do it that way. I will note that the style that we're applying here comes from the very top and has a border, and then if we don't do this border collapse, we get double borders, which seems pretty old to me, so I don't usually have, that double border look. So that's how you would accomplish that. If you want to do any code in your HTML, then there's this really awesome code tag. I haven't really used this very often, except for maybe displaying raw JSON onto a screen whenever I'm debugging or something, but it is here. It gives you a nice little style for putting out code and formatting it. We have a couple of BR tags, and then if you need to comment your code in HTML, then this is how you do it. You use the exclamation mark or bang and then 2 dashes and then end it with 2 dashes. And this is how you could comment something. So I wouldn't litter your code with comments, but if you need to specify something like, hey, I had to do this hack for getting around some weird HTML bug, then that's a great example of using a comment. Or if you want to have, more things specified in dividing up your HTML, like, hey, this is the main content and then this is like sub content. I've seen comments be used in that scenario as well. And I mentioned before that images are all over the internet, and the way to specify them is using this image tag or IMG. You specify the source and then you can give it a URL and it'll render, and you can have images on your website. If you have images, then you can reference them as well. So you would say something more to the effect of like image, like an assets directory in your own website, and then like a cat.jpg or something like that. So you can use your own images that are in the same directory as your code base, or you can go fetch images off the internet and use them just as easily. All of this code is going to be available on GitHub, so check it out, go play around with it. I encourage you to try and break it or, modify it as you see fit. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, please like and subscribe. The last thing I want to reference is this input tag. We talked about the input. There is a slew of different combinations here. There's all kinds of different stuff. So you can have email, month, image, hidden, all kinds of different things. If you're building some kind of user input, definitely reference this so you know what all your options are for getting input from the user. Thank you again for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.